All right, I'm going to introduce our speakers. Lorianne Merritt is our executive director. She's joining us from Nashville, Tennessee, and she's going to be interviewing our guest speaker, Randy Newman. So Randy Newman is the author of some really great evangelism books, such as Questioning Evangelism, Unlikely Converts, and of course, his most recent book, Mere Evangelism, 10 Insights from C.S. Lewis to Help You Share Your Faith, which is what we're going to be talking with him about today. Randy is the Senior Fellow for Evangelism and Apologetics at the C.S. Lewis Institute, and he's also an evangelism coach with us here at Christianity Explored, and he's just a great speaker, always full of wisdom. And so, yeah, Lorianne and Randy, if you guys want to join us on screen, and you guys can take it away.
Great, good to be with you.
Good afternoon and good evening for those of you joining us from the UK. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Randy, we are so grateful that you could join us today, and thank you for your partnership in the gospel. As we begin today, can you tell us where the idea for this book came from, and why do you think C.S. Lewis is a relevant model for evangelism today?
Well, sure. I'm delighted to be with you. Well, I've done a bunch of different training things in evangelism, training seminars and teaching classes. And the important topic of pre-evangelism always comes up because I think it is so absolutely crucial, saying and doing all sorts of things that pave the way for a presentation of the gospel so that people can make sense of it. And I've always thought that C.S. Lewis, what he did in Mere Christianity and in his Narnia books in particular, did that so very, very well, and yet there aren't a whole lot of other examples of that. And so I just thought, after writing Questioning Evangelism and doing some evangelism seminars, that I really wanted to write a whole entire book about pre-evangelism. And then I thought, oh, that sounds so boring. So I started thinking about, well, what can we learn from C.S. Lewis about pre-evangelism? And again, most people know that his book, Mere Christianity, was actually at first a whole series of radio broadcasts, presented 15 minutes at a time once a week. So they were spread out over the course of actually years altogether. But he went a long time in the first 4 episodes on the radio of talking about all sorts of things that were definitely pre-evangelism or pre-evangelism. He spent a whole lot of time about how do we know right and wrong. And so there's just a whole lot that we could learn from him. And I pitched the idea to the Good Book Company and they liked it. So here we are.
Well, we're excited, Randy, to learn from you, all your research, your experience through the years. And as we dig a little bit deeper, in the first chapter, you do go into more the necessity of pre-evangelism. Can you define what is pre-evangelism? Give us some examples of pre-evangelism, both from scripture and from C.S. Lewis's life.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Well, I think it's very important to have a very tight and even, I would say, narrow definition of what is evangelism. Because if you don't have a clear statement of that, it starts getting kind of fuzzy and messy. And, somebody sneezed and I said, God bless you. And, oh, that's evangelism. Well, no, it's a very nice thing to say, but it's not evangelism. So evangelism is the verbal proclamation of a very precise message, the gospel message that God sent his son to pay the price for sin. And when people respond to that in faith and with repentance, they can be saved. So it's a very concise message. And I'm not saying it's easy by any stretch, but that's evangelism. So pre-evangelism is a whole lot of discussions we can have that pave the way for that, so that when we do pronounce the gospel, proclaim it, people know what we're talking about. So examples could be a discussion in the realm of apologetics, like, well, why is it more reasonable to believe that God does exist than that God doesn't exist? Is theism more rational than atheism? That's an important conversation for a lot of people. It's pre-evangelistic, it's not the gospel, but it can pave the way so that, again, when you're presenting the gospel, they know which God you're talking about and it makes sense. And so there's all sorts of things like that. And in the scriptures, I think we have more examples of this than we tend to ordinarily think. So when Paul preached on Mars Hill in Acts 17, he talked about things like, in him we live and move and have our being. What is it? There's something inside of us that seems to be calling out for something eternal. And he quoted their poets. I think that's a brilliant pre-evangelistic strategy. You guys already believe this. You guys like this poem. Here, let me quote it and show how it's pointing to a greater thing. I love what Jesus did in John chapter 4 when he talked to the woman at the well. He talked for quite a while about water and thirst. And wouldn't it just be wonderful if there was some kind of water that when we drank it, we'd never be thirsty again? And then he dared to talk to her about her moral life and her failed marriages and the relationship she had with this man currently, as if to kind of bring the difficulty and the pain of sin to the surface. That's a pre-evangelistic conversation. So those are just some thoughts there. I should say about Lewis. So again, Lewis started the very first broadcast with things like, well, I think the very first words he said were, we've all heard people quarreling. And they're appealing to some kind of standard that they assume the other person holds to. Hey, that was my seat. Why did you steal that? Or, hey, I gave you something. You should return something to me. I thought it was so instructive for us. There's this point toward the end of his fourth message. So now people have been chewing and thinking on this for a whole month. And he said, do not think I'm going faster than I really am. I am not yet within 100 miles of the God of Christian theology. And I think some of us want to rush so quickly to that, but then our evangelism seems illogical or just implausible.
Thank you for those examples, Randy. That is so helpful. In chapter 4, you talk about the uncomfortable truths about God's holiness and our sinfulness. And you say, Lewis was not afraid to deliver the bad news that humans are sinful and deserve judgment, but he did so in a way that he moved them gently towards repentance and salvation. How did he do this?
Well, first, we need to just kind of think a little bit. For a lot of people today, they have to be uncomfortable before the gospel is good news for them. And I think that there's just a whole lot of people who they're not really uncomfortable about their current state of being separated from God. I mean, even if they do believe in God, they think, well, he's just, he's a nice God. He's a loving God. He would accept me. I mean, I've never murdered anybody. And what we need to do is to try to say, well, his standard is so much higher than we think. And our sin is so much worse than we think. And that's got to create a tension or an uncomfortableness for people so that they get to this point of, wait a minute. If God is really as holy as this guy is telling me, and if my sin really is as bad, and I think, now that I've heard him talk, I think it is, I'm in a whole lot of trouble. And people have to feel like they're in a whole lot of trouble before the gospel is a deliverance, a salvation. So Lewis did that he kept coming back to that a number of times of just stating there's a standard and we don't live up to it, but we need to. And I think some of his techniques that were so helpful were, he talked about himself and about his own experience of coming to faith and his own realization that he was terribly sinful. There's one place, I forget exactly where it is, but I'm pretty sure in Mere Christianity, where he says, people say you should hate the sin and love the sinner. And he said, I always thought that was kind of foolish. That's impossible. How could that be? And then one day I realized, no, I've been doing that for a very long time with this one particular person, me. I have been hating the sin, but still loving me. And so So one of his techniques was pointing to himself, but the most frequent technique, I think, was the use of imagery. And so he would, this is where I think this is probably, well, pre-evangelism, I think, is the biggest lesson we need to learn from Lewis, but the including of imagery. And so he just had hundreds of analogies woven into all of his writings. So becoming a Christian is like a statue becoming a real live creature, or like rebels laying down their arms, or someone waking up after a long slumber and realizing that they're now awake. And he gave these emotion-laden images so that it wasn't just these logical propositions you had to agree to. You certainly did have, there is that component of evangelism, but there's emotions and imagery when I read Lewis, and I've heard this from many people, they don't just read him and say, oh yes, that makes sense. They do say that, but they also say, and it sounds wonderful. Wouldn't that be great if that was true? He made them want it to be true, as well as understand that it is true.
That's really good. So talking about, thanks for sharing that, Randy. I like the way you shared that. Stepping back one little step there, talking about the relational environment. Actually, our Christianity Explored approach is helping people discover Jesus in the pages of Scripture in a relational environment. And in chapter 5 of your book, you talk about the importance of people. Let me quote this here. You said, the importance of people having time and space to digest different aspects of the gospel while in relationship with Christians. And on page 75, you actually mentioned Christianity Explored. Thank you. So, Randy, you've been working with Christianity Explored for years. We are so grateful for your partnership. And how do you see Christianity Explored resources being a tool that helps people create this space for non-Christians?
In a similar way that Lewis's broadcasts were once a week over the course of several weeks, that's what the experience in Christianity Explored is. You come, there's a dinner, you interact with the people around the table, you watch a video, you look at scripture, you discuss it, and then you go home and you think about it and you chew on it for a week, and then you come back for another installment. And it's gradually building the case for the gospel, but giving people time, first of all, time just on their own, take a break, go home for a week and just, let it kind of marinate. But then it's also, I think, sitting around a table and discussing with people. It enables you to process and to move. A lot of people are very far away from believing the gospel. And so for them to move all the way from, no, I think this is ridiculous, to, yes, my Lord and my God. For a lot of people, there's a lot of incremental steps along the way. So it's, no, I think this is ridiculous, to, well, I've never really thought about it. I should at least think about it. I should give it a fair hearing, to, there may be more to this than I thought. This is different than I thought. And to kind of process that out loud and to be able to ask questions and to have people say, well, so what do you mean by that? I want to understand your question a little bit, and to let people process it out loud. There are a whole lot of people who they're not ready yet to just hear it and go, yeah, okay, check, all right, good, I'm in. There's a lot of people who they almost need to express unbelief out loud and hear them say that, and then they go, wait a minute, I don't really mean that. That's too strong. And so that's what I think happens in a Christianity Explored course, whether it's actually in person or now through Zoom, if we need to be. We lose some of the personal touch by doing things by Zoom, but we don't lose much, I don't think, in the gradual processing. And in fact, maybe there's even some advantages of some people tuning in by Zoom, because this is a little less threatening. At any point I could say, okay, I'm done with this. So that's what I think is a beauty of a gradual kind of incremental processing of things.
And that's what is beautiful about Christianity Explored, because it gives people an opportunity to ask questions in a non-threatening environment with, building those relationships, going to scripture together, discovering who Christ is in the pages of scripture. So yes, we love that. And yes, Zoom, there's over 300 people on with us today. So we're grateful for technology, that's for sure, in person and technology. So Randy, I wanted to jump back. You had mentioned imagery. So in chapter 6, you talk about the importance of imagery and the imagination in describing truths about God and the gospel. Obviously, C.S. Lewis used that a lot. Can you give us some more examples? How did C.S. Lewis do that? He was so brilliant at that.
Well, again, he couldn't help himself. He just kind of wove imagery in. I mean, even in just some of his letters, his mind just thought that way. And boy, I hope all the people watching that someday get to do a tour of Belfast, Northern Ireland. So now it's my time for a commercial. I also do a great deal of work with the C.S. Lewis Institute, and we do this study tour every other year, Belfast and Oxford. And in Belfast, there are all these beautiful hills. And so Lewis was born there and was raised there. And he tells about looking out his window, looking out at the hills, and there are these rock formations. And his mind just became very active in imagery, started writing stories and creating this other world. He and his brother created a world they called Boxen. And so his mind just went in those directions, and he loved stories and he loved mythology and fables. So that was all kind of deeply ingrained. Then when he became a Christian and he wanted to express it, he just couldn't stop himself. I mean, they just kind of, dropped in every so often. I remember there's this one place where I think he was writing a letter to someone, and he was talking about non-Christian writers and naturalists and skeptics and atheists. And he said, they don't realize that this world is the vestibule to another world. And that's an unusual word, vestibule. It grabs my eye because we had one of those on the outside of the house where I grew up. But it's like this mud room, or it's an external room where you went in and you took off your muddy boots and you took off, wet clothes if it had been raining, so that then you step into your house and, that's where you live and you relax. But the vestibule was like this temporary shelter or something. But so that was an image that he just threw in there. And of course, all of his Narnia books just, woven in with another world. Here, how's this for an image? A world where it's always winter and never Christmas. That's just so filled with emotion.
Yes.
So he just did that a lot, and we need to do that more. So one of the things I encourage people in the book is try to think of just one image that might capture what your conversion story is about. And so I tell about how when my wife shares her testimony, she talks about we've all heard stories about pirates who are looking for hidden treasure, and they don't really know exactly where it is, but they know it's there somewhere and they're searching for it. She said that's what it was like for me. I thought there was something else to be looking for. I knew there was a treasure out there. I just didn't know where it was. So by painting that picture, you engage people on the emotional, imaginative level, as well as the logical, rational thing. So I'm not trying to pit those two against each other. Lewis was amazingly rational and could argue very, very thoroughly. So for him, they were just woven together, and we need to do more of that, I think.
Yes, he was so good at that, wasn't he? That's a great lesson and great insights for us to learn. In chapter 5, you also talked, you have another quote I'd love to get your insight on. You state, Jesus's proclamation of himself was truly bold. Sometimes we should just quote these claims and allow their extremity to do the heavy evangelistic lifting for us. What did you mean by this?
I'm always nervous when you start reading my own stuff, because there's always this danger of, what did I mean by that? Or, I mean, I did write this book a while ago. The writing and the editing process takes a while. So it's like, yeah, that was Well, that sounds good. I wonder what I meant. But
Well, anything you want to share with us, we're so grateful. So you can answer a different question if you'd rather.
ooh, no. Well, at least in Western culture, in America and much of the UK and even Western Europe, there's been this long tradition of believing that Jesus was just a good teacher. And he said really nice, palatable, comfortable, wonderful things. Love your neighbor, be kind, turn the other cheek. And he did say those things. But those were not the majority of the things that he said. And the majority of the things he said were just so strong and unanticipated and powerful. And that's why people responded to him with such dramatic responses. I mean, you had some group of people who say, okay, he's the Messiah. We will drop our fishing nets. We'll give up everything and we'll follow him. That's a pretty extreme response. And you don't make that kind of extreme response when someone says you should be nice. And then there was another group of people who said, okay, he's really evil. He's demon possessed. We have to kill him. And so in the Gospels, it's so very stark, but in our culture, it has become tame or declawed. I tried to just use an image there, by the way. Did you catch that? So,
yeah, very good.
So I think sometimes we just need to lay out, well, Jesus said this, Jesus said this. Just relate. Here's what the Bible says. And again, during a promo for Christianity Explored, it allows the text to be as strong as it really is. I mean, look at that. Jesus said to a group of religious Jewish people, he said, before Abraham was, I am. And the next verse, or very soon after that, they picked up stones to kill him. And you just have to kind of show that to people and say, why do they respond so strong? It's just like, I mean, did they misunderstand him? No, actually, I think they did understand him. He was claiming to be God. Mm-hmm. And for me, I grew up in a very secular, kind of modern Jewish home, suburbs of New York City, where, Jesus was just a good teacher, and all religions are basically the same. When I read the Gospel of Matthew, it was shocking. It was like, no, he didn't really say that, did he? Yeah, he did. And so Lewis was very helpful for me because he pointed to those same things. And he has that famous quote of a person who claims the kind of things Jesus claimed for himself would not be a good teacher, but he'd be a lunatic on the level of a person who calls himself a poached egg. Oh. And when I read that quote in Lewis and saw so many examples in particularly the Gospel of Matthew, it was like, oh, no, that's right. And this idea of, well, he was just a nice guy. No, I can't believe that. So sometimes I think we must allow the two-edged sword of the scriptures to do its cutting and slicing work.
That is so good, Randy, because the scripture promises that his word will not return void without accomplishing what he wants it to accomplish. So by us just sharing the scripture, which is one of the beauties of Christianity Explored, letting people open the book of the Bible to see Jesus for himself, that's where the power is. So thank you for sharing that. That's really good.
I want to throw in one more. Sorry to interrupt. But because there are these phrases that are stated in the Gospels very, very quickly, concisely, and it's easy to fly past them and not allow the power of them. So, for example, there's one place where it says that the Pharisees teamed up together with the Herodians to kill Jesus. And we just read that and we go, wow, they really hated him. Well, but wait a minute, you've got to step back from that and just do a little bit of thinking and studying. The Pharisees, religious Jews, and the Herodians, the Roman soldiers representative of Herod, and they hated each other. The Herodians just felt like, oh, these religious Jews, they're always the ones that are causing trouble. And if they want to practice their religion, fine, but they didn't bow down and worship the gods that we wanted them to worship. So they're kind of troublemakers. The Pharisees hated the Herodians even more. They're the oppressive, horrible, secular, disgusting, worldly people who are taxing us and treating us horribly. So they hated each other, but they both hated Jesus more, enough to say, let's cooperate with each other so we can get rid of this guy. And you have to allow the force of that. I mean, you try to think of the most liberal Democrat and the most conservative Republican teaming up and saying, okay, we want to work together on this bill, except that this bill is killing somebody. So so all that to say is we need to allow the scriptures to be all that they are, so that they have that powerful effect.
Beautifully said. Thank you, Randy. And that's a good lead to our last question. In the final chapter of your book, you say that one mistake many of us make is never pivoting our gospel conversations from discussion to decision. What insights does C.S. Lewis offer on how to make that pivot?
Well, if you read Mere Christianity, just opening up to the table of contents, there's 4 books, they say, and what happened was they had him come and do 5 presentations on the radio, and they thought that was it. It's only gonna be 5, maybe 6. We'll see how it's received. Well, it was received so well, they said, we should do this again. Of course, there was a gap in time when they did the next 5 or 6 weeks, and then another gap in time. But if you read the last episode in each of those 4 books, you see that Lewis tried to wrap it up with saying, okay, you who've been listening, or you who are reading, it isn't just enough to know and understand some things. You have to make a surrender. You have to repent and believe this. And what's interesting is, I think the very first close at the end of the first book, it wasn't really all that strong. It was just saying, you need to take this seriously and decide for yourself. But then the second ending was much more pointed. You must turn, you must make this decision. And that's an important component of the gospel. We're all, I think, reluctant to do that, because that's when it gets more uncomfortable. It is. I mean, it's like the temperature just shot up 10 degrees in the room. But that is part of the presentation of the gospel that we must not leave out, even if it is uncomfortable and even if it's difficult to say. So I do think we need to think through of, okay, how will I say that when I get to that point in the process? You can't make it up on the spot. You need to think through and be prepared of, here's what you need to say.
That's so good, really being equipped. That's great. Thanks, Randy. Is there anything else you'd like to say in conclusion before we go to the questions and answers?
Yeah, I always want to add this. You could read my book, you could read Lewis, you could read other books on evangelism, and it would be easy to forget that this is a supernatural process. And it is a natural process, or a human process, where 2 people are talking and engaging in conversation. So there's a very natural human component, but there is also the absolute supernatural component of God being involved in softening people's hearts and helping them understand things that they never understood before, and realizing the depths of their sin. And so we step into it, and we want to do the very, very best job we can. We want to prepare for it. But we need to remember, if God isn't involved in this process, it's a total waste of time. And if it's just natural, well, we might be able to convince people of a few things, but the supernatural regenerating work of the Spirit, helping people, enabling people to be born again, is crucial. And so entering in with, okay, I'm talking to this person and I'm talking to God. God, would you work in this person's life? And to be devoted to prayer, as Colossians 4 tells us, that we're always regularly praying for non-Christians that God has brought our way. Lord, would you work in their heart and make the gospel irresistible to them? Would you would you do what only you can do? Give me wisdom for what I need to do, but would you do the absolute supernatural work? And there's something freeing about that of, okay, this is not totally up to me. In fact, it's really not up to me. God's going to use me. Lord, please do use me. Give me wisdom. But anyway, I'm sorry, I'm rambling on too long because I'm nervous about the question and answer time. So I figured if I just keep delaying long enough with a long answer, then we've run out of time. But no,
please don't be nervous. It's just a chance for us to gain all your wisdom and insight and somehow draw it out. So you can even answer the questions differently, a whole different answer than what the question is. Just keep sharing your wisdom.
Okay.
Randy, thank you so much once again for your partnership in the gospel. We are so, so grateful for you. Thank you for these reminders of just going to the word, prayer, trusting the Lord is in control of it all. And that, yes, it's supernatural and natural. There's our part and there's God's part. And that's just great reminders. So thank you so much. And Lauren, if you want to jump in and you can start the Q&A. Thank you.
Thanks.
Will do. Awesome, Randy. You always have such good things to say. So yeah, just as a reminder to our participants, you can continue to, we've already got a lot of questions coming in, but if you want to ask your question, put it either in the chat box or the Q&A. So Randy, let's start with some of these questions.
Okay. By the way, I made myself tea in a really nice teacup to be kind of C.S. Lewis. So are you impressed?
I am impressed. That's
good.
Nice. Good job. So we have one question here that says, how might culture affect differences in approach to evangelism? For example, did you notice differences in the way that C.S. Lewis related to others as a Brit that might be different if you were an American?
Oh, it's a very important part. And so that's why Paul said in 1 Corinthians 9, I became all things to all people so that by all means I might save some. And Paul preached very differently in a Jewish synagogue in Acts 13 than he did on Mars Hill to a very secular Greek philosophical audience. Jesus spoke differently to the woman at the well, a Samaritan woman at the well, as opposed to the chapter before, John 3, speaking to Nicodemus, a religious Jewish man. So there's a lot we can learn from scripture. And there's the principle of, yes, the way we say things is just as important as the actual things that we say, of what we say. So I just think we need to learn a whole lot about our own culture, which is where it starts, because, our own culture is so deeply enculturated, we may not recognize it. So part of it is studying, what is my culture like? And how is that different from other cultures? So yes, I think it's very, very important. And that's why, if you live in a certain part of the country or a certain part of the world, you want to know what's the culture like around me. England in the 1940s is very different than Tennessee in the 21st century. Even England in the 1940s is different than England today in the 21st century. But so there's things about English culture or Southern culture or African culture. And I mean, I can't go into all of that, but it's very, very important just to consider what words communicate things most accurately in a particular culture. So let me just give you an example again. So I'm originally from New York, and I come from a Jewish background. And the way a New York Jewish culture communicates is very strongly and very bluntly. And I have learned now living in the state of Virginia that I sometimes sound, what's the word? Angry, harsh, mean, and I have to think about toning things down. So I hope I've answered the question, and I haven't offended anybody with my harsh New York blunt communication.
I don't think so, but no, that's really great. We have a question from Janice. This one's kind of interesting. She says, it's easy to see how Mere Christianity is evangelistic, but what about Lewis's other works, such as the Chronicles of Narnia? That may not be quite as obvious. She says, would you recommend using this set of 7 books as a community group for evangelism? Do you see them as evangelistic? So maybe can you speak to C.S. Lewis's other works as being evangelistic?
Well, there's this really interesting quote, a statement he makes in a letter where he said that he thought all of his works were evangelistic in some way. So, I mean, that kind of shines a light on it. I do think the Narnia stories are certainly evangelistic. They're even better, I think, as pre-evangelistic, because they create this longing for another world. I mean, just the very idea of children are in the back of a wardrobe, and they felt, and all of a sudden it's kind of cold there. It's different. They reach in, there's snow, and there's another world. Just that whole notion of I was made for another world is a very, very important pre-evangelistic argument. So would I suggest using them in like a small group discussion? I don't know. I mean, since there's 7 books, might be more, try to have discussions of the books with both believers and non-believers and talking about things. I'm not sure the best way to use all those.
Right.
But,
even just like a book club or something, like, with non-Christians or Christians could be interesting, maybe, to have those conversations. Yeah.
Right.
Right. Interesting. That's interesting that, we typically think of maybe one of C.S. Lewis's books as being the evangelism one. So interesting to hear that he felt that all of them were in some way, shape, or form. That's interesting.
Right.
We have a question from Peter. So he says, I found that the biggest objection to believing in God, in the God of the Bible, is the human condition of suffering. For like that classic, if God does exist, why doesn't he just stop all suffering, misery, and violence in the world? I think all Christians need to have a biblical response to this objection handy. But what are your comments on this? Obviously, we know C.S. Lewis touches on this a little bit in Mere Christianity, but maybe what are even some pre-evangelistic practices we could use to kind of address when we hear this question, maybe as a really quick rebuttal of, well, I don't believe in God because of suffering. How can we learn from Lewis about how to handle that question?
All right, so I have an hour for this question, right?
Right, yeah.
All right, great.
5-minute answer.
Well, so the first is, I do believe it is, if not the biggest objection, it's certainly one of the top 3, and it's the one that could involve the most amount of pain. People may express it in kind of a sort of a neutral kind of way, but for a lot of people, there's some deep, deep, deep horror behind that. So I think we definitely have to prepare for it, and we need to respect the question for as heavy as it is. Rather than dismiss it or try to be quick, it's a very, very difficult issue. And if we treat it as if it's not difficult or not weighty, then people will stop listening to us. And in fact, I think they should, because it's like you're not in touch with reality. So why would I listen to you? It is interesting that the very first book Lewis wrote as a kind of an outreach book was The Problem of Pain. So he decided to start his apologetic writing with that as, okay, let's take on the biggest and the heaviest. It's also important to remember that that was such a huge issue in his own life. His mother died when he was 10 years old. And he says, looking back at it, that he gave up on believing in God then, because he prayed for his mother to be healed and God didn't answer the prayer the way he wanted him to. So, and then he goes off to World War I and sees really, just horrific battles and people dying right next to him, and very, very closest of his friends died in battle. So there was a whole lot of pain in his own life. And, but then he had to wrestle with, okay, I don't believe that God exists, but why am I drawn to beauty and mythology and stories that paint of a world of beauty? And he said that he had to experience that difficulty of, I don't believe there's any purpose and meaning in life, and yet I'm drawn to these imaginary things. Why is that? He also had to be very, very honest with himself. There's this one place where he said, I did not believe that God existed, and I was angry at God for not existing. So I think that kind of honesty and vulnerability is helpful in our discussion. So we need to identify with people when they ask that question of, yes, it is painful and very difficult. Now, I go in the direction of, there's only a handful of different ways people have dealt with this issue. And because everybody has to deal with this issue. And so there's an atheist answer, there's a Christian answer, there's a Jewish answer, there's an Eastern answer, there's a secular answer. There's only, 5 or 6. They're all disappointing and they're all incomplete, all of them. But I think the Christian one is better than the other incomplete answers. I very quickly want to say, yeah, there's aspects about this that I'm still struggling with and wrestling with, even as a Christian. But the Christian answer offers hope and purpose in the midst of it better than any other worldview perspective on it. So when people ask that question, very often they ask it in a kind of a dismissive way of, I don't believe in God because of this, there, end of discussion. And what we want to do is, well, no, let's discuss it because it's such an important issue.
Yeah, that's really good. That's good. Renata kind of touches on, she's kind of asking for advice on how to handle those kind of hard situations in evangelism. She says sometimes in hard situations, like the call to decide for or against Jesus's offer of salvation, so kind of that decision moment pivot that we were talking about earlier. She said, I found that saying this is a hard thing to say or to consider, but it's super important. In fact, it's crucial. Can be helpful. It seems like it diffuses the awkwardness or the pain by identifying it. And she just asks, what do you think about that approach?
Oh, I think it's brilliant. I think it's great. And I want to put a label on it. And the label is sometimes we need to have a conversation about the conversation. So here's the content that we want to say. You need to decide. You need to repent. Turning to Jesus involves repentance and faith. Yes. But so very often we need to step outside of the conversation and look at it and say, I realize this is difficult. I realize that what I'm saying is unusual. I realize this may be not what you were expecting or what you were wanting. I realize even to say, I want you to know, I find it difficult to say because I know it's so very weighty. So there's something very powerful, I think, of sort of stepping out of the conversation, looking at it. It's almost like at that point, I hope this makes sense. In a lot of conversations, it's like we're facing each other. So I say this, you say that, we're facing each other. There comes a time every so often to sort of turn and both look in the same direction. And it's looking at the conversation. And so it's looking at Jesus. It's looking at something Jesus just said. It's looking at something we just read in the Bible and say, I realize that's difficult. Yeah. And Jesus did that. So he's the supreme example. He'll say, this is a hard saying. You remember there's that point of, they come to him and say, people are leaving you. And he said, well, are you going to leave too? And the response was, well, no, you have the words of eternal life. But so I think that's a very important part of the process of stepping out of the conversation and looking at the conversation.
That's good. Conversation about the conversation. I like that. Maybe have time for a couple of more here. So Lindsay, Lindsay asks, she says, Randy talks a lot about people not appreciating the holiness of God and the depths of their sinfulness. We hear it said that God's standard is perfection because he's perfectly holy. But how do we answer an unbeliever who says this is an unfair demand of God because we're only human? So do you or does C.S. Lewis offer any insight into this holiness, sinfulness paradigm here?
Yeah. By the way, I have to replay a little bit on the tape. You thank you for your encouragement about that phrase, conversation about the conversation. I've stolen that from Tim Keller. I heard it from him. So I didn't make it.
Thank you, Tim Keller.
Yes. This is an unfair demand of God. I guess if I heard that, I think one of the first things I would try to do is, again, so here's another tactic, so to speak, of finding as much agreement with the person who's asking the question. So I would try to start with, well, yeah, it's huge, isn't it? I mean, it's really so radical. But and then I would try to find support in a place where the person could agree with me. So again, this is Lewis's approach of right and wrong as a clue to the meaning of the universe, or beauty, excuse me, as a clue to the meaning of the universe. So I would want to say, well, yes, God is making this demand of holiness, but isn't there something inside of us that says there really should be holiness, or there should be right and wrong? There should be justice. Isn't there something inside of us? When we hear about injustice, we say, no, that's wrong. So somebody needs to stop that. They should be punished. And this is, I think, the logic of Romans chapter 1 and chapter 2. Chapter 1 is, look out at the world and see beauty and majesty. And doesn't that make you think that there's a creator? But then Romans 2 says, look within, look in your heart. And isn't there something in there that's crying out for an ultimate standard of holiness? Mm-hmm. So trying to find words that the person can agree with, so that the scriptural teaching of God's holiness doesn't seem ridiculous. It takes a lot of work. That's a lot of back and forth and conversation. It's not as simplistic as they say this, I say this, there, we're done. Right. No, it's a lot of listening and conversation and engaging in long conversation.
That's good. That's good. Well, I feel a bit unfair to you by lobbing this question at you with just a couple of minutes to go, but two people asked it, so I felt like I had to address it. Mark and Juby both asked, Randy, what do you see as the top 3 objections to the gospel or Christianity that require pre-evangelism?
So
we already mentioned one, like problem of pain, suffering. So maybe what are the other 2 that you see as the most common ones you hear?
Did you say, was it, I have to say 3? Is that the magic number?
They asked for 3.
They asked for 3. Okay, well, so, well, there's this, I really like Glenn Scrivener. He's an evangelist in the UK, and I've heard him speak a number of times, and he says the top 3 questions today all begin with the letter S. It's suffering, sex, and science. And so suffering, we've talked about it. The Christian, very, very narrow, old-fashioned view of sexuality seems crazy to most people in our world. And then science, has science replaced God, or proven that God is no longer necessary? So those 3, I think, are the ones we need to be prepared for. I would also add the question that has always been the very, very big stumbling block of the exclusivity of the gospel. Is Jesus really the only way? Aren't there many ways? So I think those are the ones we need to prepare ourselves for. And we need to prepare ourselves enough to say, okay, how would I start a response? And what are the crucial things I need and want to say, but not feeling like I've got to have it all mapped out in between, because who knows how that's going to go. But we need to prepare ourselves for those, so that when the questions do come, our immediate thought is not, oh no, I can't believe they asked that question. But it's more of, oh, okay, here is a great opportunity for me to try to help this person move gradually from, no, this is crazy, to, oh, this is really good. There are a lot of really good resources for us on those questions out there. So it's not like we have to totally, reinvent this wheel. There's lots of good short books, longer books. So I think there's some great resources for us to find.
That's excellent. That's great. And one of those resources is definitely Evangelism. So be sure that you guys buy Randy's book. And again, I will send and have already sent in the chat box a link to the feedback form. When you fill that out, you can get a code for 50% off of Randy's book, which I would highly recommend, because you guys asked so many great questions that I just simply don't have time to address with Randy live, but that he, I'm sure, would love for you to read his book, and then you can find out more about what he thinks and what C.S. Lewis says. So yeah, I just want to close just really briefly again with reminder of the feedback form in the survey. And I just want to take a minute to thank all of you who are on the call who give to our ministry that enables us to offer these resources for free, like these webinars with Randy. So if you're interested in joining that team of ministry partners, you can give both to the US and the UK. I will drop the links to the US and the UK's giving sites. And yeah, we just really appreciate your support of our ministry. So Randy, there's one more just burning question that I feel like we have to address. Tim wants to know, whose head is that on your middle shelf? The bust on the middle shelf back there, who is that?
Well, the top is Abraham Lincoln.
Right.
And that's Beethoven, Ludwig von Beethoven.
It's Beethoven. So, I should have known that.
Well, I really like them, and so they shape some of my thinking, and so I thought I'd just put sort of a strange item behind me.
That's great. That's fantastic. Oh, John Kimball is reminding us you can also give to our ministry in Canada as well. So yeah, I will send a link for all of that in a follow-up email. And we hope to see you guys at our next webinar, Carolyn Lacey, on November 17th. Mark your calendars. But Randy, thank you so much for joining us today. You're just full of so much wisdom. And yeah, we look forward to doing another webinar or training or something with you in the future.
I hope so. That'd be great. Thanks very much.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for joining us, and the recording will be posted on YouTube, and I will send it to you guys as soon as it is available. So thank you, everyone. Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Randy.